Welcome back. Today we're looking at the Elephant Gambit, an aggressive counterattack that begins after the very popular opening moves pawn to e4, pawn to e5, and knight to f3. Instead of the common developing move knight to c6, black can choose a much sharper idea by immediately striking in the center with pawn to d5, aiming for active play and attacking chances. In most games, white will capture the pawn with pawn takes d5. Occasionally, white may try something else, but will focus on the main response first. After the capture on d5, black does not rush to take the pawn back. Instead, black pushes forward with pawn to e4, increasing the pressure and gaining space in the center. At this point, white's knight on f3 is in an uncomfortable situation. The knight has very limited safe squares, and several of them are controlled by black's queen. If the knight jumps forward to knight to d4, black can simply capture the pawn on d5, and the knight will soon be chased away while black keeps the initiative. Sooner or later, some players try queen to e2, hoping to pin the pawn and put pressure on it. However, black has several responses here, and the most aggressive one is bishop to e7. With this move, black willingly offers the pawn. If white captures it, they walk straight into a clever trap. Black continues development with knight to f6, while white often wastes time moving the queen around the board, giving black valuable tempos. When the king is checked, black calmly blocks the attack. After the likely exchange of pieces, black develops another piece with tempo, improving the position even further. At this stage, white may realize they also need to develop their pieces. A common attempt is bishop to b5, trying to create pressure along the diagonal. But black remains calm and committed to the gambit strategy. Black can even allow white to capture another pawn. Since this is the Elephant Gambit, the idea is rapid development and attacking chances rather than material. White may become greedy and start capturing pieces one by one, perhaps even aiming for the rook next, but the position is already collapsing for white. It becomes extremely difficult to defend. Now black plays rook to b8, dramatically increasing the pressure and taking control of the position. Let's look at another interesting line. Suppose white develops naturally with knight to c3, a move that appears in many openings and is usually considered very solid. Surprisingly, in this position, it becomes a serious mistake. Then comes the brilliant move rook to b4. At first glance, this rook move looks strange, but its purpose quickly becomes clear. No matter what white plays next, black follows with bishop to b7. Suddenly, white's queen is completely trapped with no safe squares. The rook on b4 blocks several escape squares, the bishop on b7 controls important diagonals, and black's knight and bishop take away additional squares. Even worse for white, their own knight on c3 removes one of the queen's possible escape routes. Because of this, the move knight to c3 turns out to be a devastating blunder. If white instead chooses a more careful move like castling, black still has powerful attacking plans. For example, black can immediately play bishop to b7, attacking both the queen and the knight. Another strong idea is rook to b6, which further limits the queen's movement. If white moves the queen to a safer square, black continues the attack by developing the knight, once again chasing the queen. Depending on where the queen goes, black can follow with moves such as bishop to a6, attacking along the long diagonal, or bishop to f6, controlling another important diagonal. Meanwhile, the rook on the b-file restricts the queen's movement, and the knight covers several key squares. The queen has very few safe places to hide. If white tries something like queen to a5, black can suddenly switch the attack to the king side with knight to f4. This knight jump creates new threats, while black's bishop, rook, and other pieces are ready to join the attack. The pressure quickly becomes overwhelming. Finally, let's see another typical mistake. If white once again plays knight to c3, black can sacrifice the knight to open the enemy king's position. Then the rook swings to the king side with check. After the king moves, black can capture white's queen and easily win the game. And if you really want to embarrass your opponent, instead of capturing the queen immediately, you can play bishop to b7, creating an unstoppable checkmate threat along the diagonal. For example, if white decides to capture your queen, you immediately respond with bishop takes f3, delivering a beautiful checkmate that demonstrates the overwhelming power of your attacking position. If you prefer a safer and more positional approach, there is another clever trap available. Suppose your opponent plays queen to e2, pinning your pawn on e4 to your king and attacking it at the same time. Instead of panicking, you calmly defend by developing a piece with knight to f6, a very natural move. If white tries to take advantage of the pin, they will often play pawn to d3, attacking your pawn on a4 again. Since the pawn on e4 cannot move because it is pinned, you respond by playing pawn takes d5. This move not only captures a pawn, but also protects your pawn on a4. White may still feel confident and continue with knight to c3, creating a double attack on both your pawn on a4 and your queen. However, you immediately counter with bishop to b4, pinning their knight to the king. Now the position becomes very interesting, with multiple pins on the board. If white attempts to escape the pin with bishop to d2, planning to free their knight, you can simply capture the knight on c3. After the exchange, white's position remains uncomfortable because several of their pieces are still restricted. You can then safely castle your king, completing your development and strengthening your position. At this moment, your opponent might calculate something like this. They capture your knight, you recapture his bishop, and then they take the pawn on a4, winning material and damaging your pawn structure. However, you have a much stronger reply. Instead of recapturing the bishop immediately, you first capture the knight. This powerful move attacks both white's queen and bishop at the same time. Because of this double attack, white is forced to lose a piece on the next move. After the exchanges and pawn takes, you reach the endgame with an extra knight, which gives you a clearly winning position. Even if your opponent checks your king, you can simply step aside. With no real attack remaining, your extra piece will decide the game. Now let's examine an even trickier setup. After pawn to d5, when white captures the pawn with pawn takes d5, you actually have two possible plans. If you want to stay aggressive, you can immediately push the pawn forward to e4, challenging white's knight and fighting for the center. But if you want to set a trap, you can instead play bishop to d6, placing your bishop on an attacking diagonal and preparing a hidden idea. White will often develop naturally with knight to c3, protecting the central pawn. You then continue with knight to f6, bringing another piece into the game. White may follow up with bishop to c4, developing the bishop while also defending the pawn on d5. Now you play the surprising move pawn to e4, attacking their knight. White usually does not want to move the knight backward or block their own development, so many players simply continue with castling, unaware that they are walking directly into a trap. If white later brings the knight to the center, you can calmly castle your king as well. In most games, your opponent will also castle, believing it is the safest and most natural move. The Elephant Gambit is full of hidden surprises, where even natural moves can quickly turn into serious mistakes. One powerful idea is the famous Greek gift sacrifice. You begin with bishop takes h2, forcing the king into the open. Then you continue with knight to g4, starting a dangerous attack. If the king retreats, you play queen to h4, creating an immediate checkmate threat. To delay defeat, white usually has to move the rook to give the king an escape square. Instead of mating right away, you capture the pawn on f2 with queen takes f2, and a few precise checks lead to a forced checkmate. Sometimes white tries a counterattack by pushing a pawn in the center. In that case, you simply castle your king and ignore it. If they continue, the e-file opens and you play rook to e8, pinning the knight to the king and winning material. If white castles instead of defending, they again walk into bishop takes h2, followed by knight to g4 check, bringing your queen into the attack and quickly winning material. Another common mistake is pawn takes e4, attacking your queen. But this only helps you. You calmly play queen to h4, preparing queen to h2, which launches a crushing attack against the enemy king.